The story begins as we see a boy named Pei who rushes to get to work. We learn he's just an average guy who got a normal job after graduating from college, but he finds his boss to be toxic. He makes it to the train station and the doors are about to close, but he charges in and manages to get on just in time. We see that it's 1 minute to 9, but Pei dashes through and he manages to sign in at the last moment. The morning goes by and Pei starts thinking about what he should order for lunch. But he has to compare all the different discounts to get the best deal since he's broke. After he eats his lunch, he starts playing a game to relax, but when he notices his boss, he quickly tabs to a different screen. The boss watches from behind him, but doesn't notice anything. Pei continues with his game, but his boss constantly tries to catch him, trying to sneak up on him. At 6 p.m., Pei is the first to log off, preparing to get home as soon as possible, but he's stopped by his boss. His boss asks for a copy of his presentation, but Pei notes that the deadline is a week away. His boss insists on getting it today, but Pei refuses, telling his boss off. His boss threatens to fire him, but he doesn't care, telling his boss not to forget his severance or else he will sue. But we see this was just all his imagination as he agrees to work overtime to get the presentation done. We see Pei working until he's the last one in the office when the light goes out and he suddenly gets a message. He sees that his friend sent him a quiz to seed his fortune, but he accidentally drops his phone into his bin. As he goes to pick it up, he sees the screen that promises to reveal his fortune, and there's suddenly a voice that says the fortune conversion system will be activated. His phone bursts with light and countless talismans suddenly appear circling around him. He gets sucked up in the air and thrown into his bin, causing him to disappear. He gets woken up by his friend Yang Ma, who tells him to get up for the dean's class because attendance will be taken. He's confused as he looks around, and his roommates tell him to get up as they leave. Pei realizes he's in his old college dorm, and he's gone back to when he was a freshman. He wonders what's going on, and he thinks about going to his class, but he remembers that the dean never actually took attendance in his class. While there was another teacher who always acted friendly, saying attendance didn't matter, but at the end of the semester, failed everyone that didn't attend. He thinks about how to get back to the future, but realizes that this is his chance to change his life, so he doesn't end up working a dead-end job. He's suddenly about to fall, but his fortune conversion system activates. The system comes to life and introduces itself as Richie. It explains that the system will give him a startup fund to help him get rich. He's given 50,000 to begin with, and he instantly thinks about the things he can buy. Richie goes on to explain that the system will give him money at regular intervals, which he can use to run a company, and based on his profit to loss conversion rate, he can earn money for himself. Pei gets excited about getting rich, and Richie generates his profit to loss conversion rate, but it doesn't go as expected because his loss ratio is higher than his profit rate, so losing money is actually more profitable. He gets excited thinking it will be easier to lose money than earn it, so he celebrates how lucky he is. Richie tells him the next step is to register a company, so he wonders what kind of field he should get into, thinking of a shortcut. But Richie mentions a bunch of rules and restrictions, so he realizes he needs to have a legitimate company. He asks for some time to think, and he looks for some ideas. As he checks his phone, he realizes that the games industry would be perfect to lose his money since it's hard to actually become successful. He tells Richie his decision, but accidentally names his company something ridiculous, but doesn't care since he doesn't plan to be successful. Richie goes on to warn him that he can't tell anyone about the system or else he will face a punishment. Richie wishes him the best of luck, and a 14-day timer appears. Pei panics as he wonders how he can develop a game in only 14 days, and Yang returns to the dorm. Pei asks him if it's possible to make a game in only 2 weeks, and Yang says it's actually easy, revealing a platform filled with templates and resources that make it possible to make a game without even knowing how to code. We see Pei looking over the platform in the library, realizing it's not the best, but thinks it's perfect for just making a bad game. He spends 20,000 on a driving simulator template, paying 15,000 for background assets, and he adds some other basic features, managing to spend all his money. He thinks about what the gameplay should be like, and he decides to make the most boring game possible. He creates the course for the game, and he ends up making it over 8 hours long, thinking the players will hate it. He thinks it's perfect, calling the game The Lonely Desert Road, and he decides to sell it for only 1 yuan, so he can have the lowest profit in case anyone buys it. He sees that nobody is buying his game, so he becomes happy, thinking he's going to make a profit. Their neighbors enter the dorm, inviting them to play video games, but Pei tells them that he won't be playing because he wasn't able to sleep the previous night. His roommates play against their neighbors, but they realize that they're all noobs, and they end up losing the match. As they continue playing, Pei rests on his bed, as Yang wonders if they're bothering him. But he reveals that he's enjoying the moment. We learn that after he started working, he bought all the games he wanted, but he wasn't able to play them because he was too busy with his tasks. But he knows that everything's going to be different because he just needs to lose money to earn profit, thinking he'll never need to work again, so he can live the life he always dreamed of. We meet the content creator Cao, and we learn that he's popular for covering bad games in his channel, but he's struggling to make money because he can't find a sponsor. He looks for a game to cover for his next video, and he finds The Lonely Desert Road. He reads the introduction, which mentions that the game will make him reflect on his life. He finds it interesting, so he decides to play it, and he's surprised to learn that it has no story whatsoever. He starts driving in the desert, but he becomes distracted, so he ends up crashing, causing him to lose the game. But he uses his controller, and he spends hours trying to complete it. But he starts to feel drowsy, so he tries to pause the game, but he realizes that he can't, and he ends up crashing again, causing him to become angry. He becomes determined to finish the game, thinking his gaming skills are being tested, so he decides to play it with everything he has, but he still struggles to clear it, and he's now frustrated, thinking about giving up, but a notification mentions that there's something waiting for him at the finish line. So he becomes curious, and he continues playing for hours as he starts reflecting on his life, thinking he has achieved enlightenment. He finally reaches the finish line, but the game congratulates him for wasting 8 hours of his life, so he becomes angry, calling it a scam. We see Pei in his classroom as Richie shows him his data, informing him that he has 11 days before the next closing date. He thinks he's about to make a fortune because nobody is downloading his game, but at that moment, he hears his classmates talking about it, realizing it has gone viral, so he rushes back home, wondering why people are buying it. And he checks his laptop, realizing that it has become incredibly popular because Chao covered it in his channel. Pei watches his video as he tells his viewers not to play Lonely Desert Road, calling it the most boring game in history, and he mentions that it congratulated him for wasting his time. But this made people curious, so they started buying the game. Yang invites Pei to play it, saying they should give it a try, but he refuses, and he notes that the situation is bad because he wants his game to flop, so he changes its description, trying to convince the players to ask for a refund, but they tell him that the procedure is tedious, so they decide to let him keep the money. A few days later, we learn that Yang has been playing the game, but he wonders how it became viral, saying it's terrible, but people can't stop playing it. Pei mentions that it wasn't meant to be played, and he falls into despair, knowing he's going to earn less. We cut to a man named Lee, who is the owner of a large gaming company. His assistant informs him about Lonely Desert Road, saying it's becoming popular, but she mentions that it only costs 1 yuan, saying it isn't worth buying because they won't make a profit, but he reveals that he doesn't care about money because his goal is to monopolize the gaming industry, and he fires her for not sharing his vision. Pei searches the internet, wanting to learn how to lose money, but he can't find an answer because nobody is interested in that topic. The closing date arrives, and he realizes that his game earns 70,000 yuan, but because of the conversion rate, he only receives 700. Richie congratulates him for creating a successful game, but he isn't happy because he wanted to earn more money. Richie tells him that he will have 3,000 yuan for the second round, revealing that he has 30 days until the next closing date. But he wonders how he's supposed to spend the money, because it can only be used to start a business. Pei returns home, and Yang invites him to play, realizing he's in a bad mood. He agrees to this, so Yang informs their roommates that he's going to join them, thinking they can finally get revenge on their neighbors. Pei carries the team. They still end up losing because Yang is a terrible player, so everyone blames him for the result. He tells Pei that he should have done a better job, so he becomes upset, calling Yang a burden, but he suddenly comes up with an idea. That evening, Pei thinks about Yang, thinking he's the key to losing all of his money. Pei approaches him as he sleeps, but he sees Pei, so he panics, alerting everyone in the building. The next day, Pei continues to follow Yang, so he becomes upset, asking Pei what he wants. He mentions that he wants Yang, so everyone gets the wrong idea, and he tries to run away, but Pei stops him, saying he needs help developing a game. But Yang is against this, thinking they won't succeed, and he's about to walk away. But Pei reveals that he has already made 3,000 yuan, because he's the creator of Lonely Desert Road. Yang is surprised to hear this, calling him a genius, and Yang agrees to work with him, saying he will find books about the topic. Back in the dorm, we see that Yang bought books about programming and Pei thinks they're going to fail because he isn't being practical. Pei reminds him that they don't need to write codes because they already have the online platform to make the job easier, so Yang wonders what he should do with the books. He tries reading them anyways, but he immediately falls asleep and Pei is happy to see this, thinking his plan is going to work. The next day, Pei thinks about the game they should make, knowing his company is popular because of a driving game, so he needs to think of something different, because people will download the game if it's similar to Lonely Desert Road. He considers spending all of his funds to create a bigger game and intentionally fail to launch it, but Richie warns him that he will receive a penalty, so he ultimately decides against it. He realizes that mobile players aren't familiar with his company, so he plans to create a mobile game. He knows that card games are popular, but most of them fail because they try to copy the #1 game called The Three Kingdoms instead of coming up with a new idea. So he decides to make the worst card game in the world, telling Yang that they're going to hire artists to help them with the design. Yang tells him that there's a cheaper way to do it, but he's determined to lose all of his money, so he tells Yang that he's going to invest everything he has to create the best card game possible. They eat at a restaurant as Pei tells Yang to rewrite the stories of the characters, but he becomes worried, thinking it's going to ruin the game. But Pei tells him that they must not be afraid to innovate, saying he should let his imagination run wild. He thinks about turning the characters into strange creatures, and Pei calls him a genius. He decides to hire Yang, telling him that he will receive 3,000 yuan per month, and he's overjoyed to hear this. Meanwhile, Li's new assistant tells him that Three Kingdoms is losing players, because it's difficult to obtain rare cards. But he explains that the game won't be addictive if they change this, saying card games are on the decline, so they should just let it be. Li's assistant confirms this, and he mentions that Pei's company is planning to copy Three Kingdoms, saying there's no creativity whatsoever. But Li reveals that he was the one who picked the theme for their game, thinking his assistant is questioning his creativity, so he decides to fire him. We return to Pei as he laughs at Yang's ideas, thinking their game is going to be ridiculous. He checks his laptop, wanting to hire a rookie artist to create ugly designs, and he finds someone interesting, thinking he's going to help them fail. The next day, Yang suggests turning the characters into girls, but Pei rejects the idea, thinking it could make their game successful. So he explains that he doesn't want the characters to lose their uniqueness, and Yang believes him as he notes that Yang is an idiot. They ride a boat as Pei tells Yang that they must prioritize the concept design, so he suggests hiring a great artist, but Pei is against this because he doesn't want them to succeed. He believes that Pei doesn't want the artist to steal the spotlight, thinking Pei wants him to shine, so he mentions that they should prioritize gameplay over design. He offers to do the drawing, but Pei is against this because he wants to waste money on a rookie artist. They have a heated argument, but the boat becomes unstable, causing it to capsize as they realize that their guide is drowning. So they decide to save him, but he tells them to leave, blaming them for what happened. Pei tells Yang about the artist he found, and we see that he draws Chibi character. Pei convinces Yang that hiring him would be a good idea, saying it will create a unique style that will make their game stand out. Yang asks for his contact details, so Pei reveals that his name is Guanjin, and they decide to have a meeting with him. During the video call, Yang tells Guanjin about their plan, as Pei explains that they need him to design the 50 characters in the game, saying he can have full artistic freedom. But they don't want him to draw chibis. He wonders why they want to hire him, because he specializes in drawing chibis, so Pei tells him that they see potential in him. He agrees to do it, but he mentions that his price is 2,000 yuan for each character. Yang becomes upset, thinking it's too expensive, but Pei tells him that the price is too low, saying they're willing to pay him 3,500 yuan for his unique art style. He's surprised to hear this, thinking it's more than enough, but Richie warns Pei that unreasonably increasing the price is against the rules, so he tells Guanjin that it will include the amendment fees, and Guanjin agrees to this, as Richie withdraws the warning, thinking the price is reasonable. But we learn that he doesn't plan to ask for amendments. He tells Guanjin that he can do whatever he wants with the art style, because they believe in him, saying he has 2 weeks to complete the task. After the meeting, Yang comments that he doesn't like Guanjin because he has a bad attitude, but Pei explains that he could be an introvert. Pei tells Yang to handle the art designs while he works on the gameplay, saying they will be busy in the coming days. But we learn that he ordered Yang to monitor Guanjin because he wants the drawing to be as ugly as possible, thinking they won't work well together. He thinks about making the players hate the game by making it cost 10 yuan, which is 2 times the price of the 3 kingdoms, and he considers setting up a lifelong membership that gives them unlimited draws, thinking the players will get bored because he knows that they enjoy grinding to obtain rare cards. He searches for the worst template he can find, and he sees a failed project from another company, which tried to copy the 3 kingdoms. He realizes that it looks horrible, thinking nobody would want to play it, so he decides to buy it. We cut to Guanjin as he meets up with his team, telling them about the job, but they think the game is going to suck because the character descriptions don't make sense. They consider abandoning the project, thinking the job is a scam, but Guanjin tells them that the client has already paid the deposit. He mentions that they have full artistic freedom, thinking this is their chance to make a name for themselves, so everyone decides to give it their best shot. He suggests sticking to the style he invented, thinking it's going to make the characters shine, but they explain that they aren't familiar with it. So he tells them that he will handle the designs and they can add the finishing touches, saying they must come up with the best result possible. They start working on the project, giving it everything they have, and they're able to finish it before the deadline. We return to the dorm as Yang realizes that Guanjin has already finished the designs, asking Pei if he wants to see it. But he doesn't care, telling Yang to put it into the game if he has no issues with it. He wonders what they should name the project, so Pei tells him that they should call it the Phantom General, and he goes to sleep. The next day, Yang tells Pei that he didn't find any bugs in the game, wondering if they should release it. Pei realizes that it's the launch date, so he tells Yang to upload it, saying they should market it as an ordinary card game. Yang thinks he's trying to use reverse psychology, but he doesn't really care, and he just wants to lose all of his money to make as much profit as possible. We see Yang getting beat up by his roommates because they lost another game, and they blame him for the result, calling him useless. Pei suddenly arrives, pulling him away, and asks him why the concept design of the game is so detailed. Pei accuses him of stealing the design from others, but he explains that Guanjin created it, and Pei is surprised to hear this because he thought that Guanjin is a terrible artist. Yang is happy with the design, but Pei becomes upset, saying it looks excellent. But Yang wonders why he's complaining because Guanjin did a great job. He claims that it's because he's underpaying Guanjin, but we learn that it's because he wanted Guanjin to make ugly designs so that his game would fail. Yang leaves him, wondering what's wrong with him, and he reveals that he regrets hiring Guanjin, thinking his game is going to become successful because of the brilliant design. But he thinks about the other games that flopped, realizing that they also have beautiful designs, so he thinks his game can still fail. Later that day, Yang tells Pei that 100 users have downloaded the Phantom General, but he realizes that they all left negative reviews. Pei is happy to hear this, thinking the game is going to fail, but Yang thinks that someone hired trolls to attack them. Pei pretends that it's bothering him, but he's grateful to the trolls, and Yang thinks about responding to their reviews, but Pei tells him to forget it, saying it isn't worth it, because there's too many of them, and Yang thinks he's a great person because he's able to maintain his composure despite what's happening. After some time, we see Yang playing the lonely desert road, and he has a conversation with Guanjin, who wonders if they have issues with the design. He tells Guanjin that he did an amazing job, and they start talking about the game as Guanjin's friends approach him, saying they're lucky to have such a kind-hearted client because they were paid more than enough. He checks the game, and he sees that it isn't performing well, wondering why they haven't seen ads about it. He realizes that it was made by the same company, which created Lonely Desert Road, and his friends are surprised to hear this because everyone knows about the game. They wonder why the Phantom General didn't go through a testing period, thinking the company doesn't know what it's doing, and Guanjin decides to play the game. He notes that the gameplay is basic, and he's astonished by his own design, thinking it's making the game stand out. He realizes that special effects were added to his artwork, and he's happy to see this because he thinks it looks perfect. He's able to obtain rare cards, and he continues to play the game, but he notices something strange, so he decides to call Yang, asking him why there's only one item for sale, and it's an extremely cheap lifelong membership. He wonders if they will be adding more items to the game's shop, but Yang reveals that they won't because Pei wants the players to enjoy the game. Guanjin is surprised to hear this, thinking the company can't make profit because the item only costs 3 yuan, But Yang explains that Pei doesn't prioritize making profits, and Guanjin thinks he's a great person, saying he doesn't want Pei to fail. Yang starts crying, telling him that Pei spent all of his money in the game, so he's already broke, thinking this is the reason why he's been acting strange lately. So Guanjin wants to help, and he ends the call, but we learned that Yang was just pretending to be sad. Guanjin meets up with his team, and they're surprised to learn that Pei doesn't prioritize making profits. They think he's amazing because he's nothing like the other game developers who only think about money, so they decide to help him. We return to Pei, who thinks his game has already failed, so he starts thinking about the 3,000 yuan he's going to receive. But Yang suddenly clings to him, telling him that their game has gone viral. He's surprised to hear this, wondering how the players learned about the game because he didn't spend money on marketing. He checks his phone, and he realizes that the game has been flooded with positive reviews, so he wonders why it's performing well. He realizes that the customers like the concept design, so he decides to call Guanjin, asking him if he promoted the game on the internet. We learn that Guanjin shared it with other artists who thought his designs are impressive, and he's surprised that the experts loved his artwork, but he wants to help advertise the game. His friends wonder why he wants to do this, knowing he hates socializing with people. So he tells them that he wants Pei to succeed, because he's an amazing person. So Guanjin tells everyone about the game, telling them that it was created by a kind-hearted person, so they decide to support it, leaving positive reviews, and causing it to go viral. Pei wonders why he did this, because he wasn't paid to advertise the game, but he explains that he really wants Pei to succeed. He becomes sad, realizing that he's going to earn less, but he thanks Guanjin for helping him anyway. Guanjin feels good, thinking Pei is really happy because his game is successful, but Yang thinks about the negative reviews, wondering who hired the internet trolls. We cut to Li as his new assistant informs him that the Phantom General is about to surpass the Three Kingdoms. We learn that he was the one who hired the internet trolls, and Li thinks that Pei chose to copy the Three Kingdoms because he wants to prove that he's better than Li. He thinks he's being targeted, so he wants to acquire Pei's company, saying it's time to proceed with their plan. We see Pei in the restroom, making sure that no one is watching him, and he calls the customer service representative, telling her that he wants his game to be removed from the recommended list. She explains that this is a strange request, saying she needs to talk to her superiors, but Richie suddenly appears, telling him he's breaking the rules, so he ends the call. Pei becomes sad and he starts walking around, but the screen appears on the ground as he realizes that the closing date has arrived. Richie appears and it starts tallying, revealing that P made a net income of over 500,000. So he falls into despair, wondering why the game is so profitable because it was made to flop, and Richie tells him he's going to earn 5,000 yuan because of the conversion rate. Richie reveals that the next closing date will arrive in 90 days, and he thinks about how profitable his games have become, realizing that he's struggling to lose money. He hates Richie for increasing the starting fund, but Richie tells him that he already has enough for the next round, so they won't be increasing it. At that moment, he receives an additional 1,000 yuan as Richie reminds him that his games are still earning money. We return to Li as he tells his assistant that Pei's company has grabbed his attention, so he's willing to spend money to acquire it. Pei is watching a soccer game when he suddenly receives a call from Yang, who tells him that Li wants to buy their company. So he becomes overjoyed, thinking about accepting it. But he receives a warning because he isn't allowed to sell his company, so he's forced to reject the offer. But Yang tells him that Li is offering millions of yuan to buy their company, and he becomes devastated, but he still tells Yang to refuse it. Li offers to invest in their company, but Pei explains that he doesn't need it because he has more than enough money at his disposal, asking Yang if he can invest in Li's company instead. Li learns about this, so he becomes upset, thinking Pei is trying to humiliate him, and he starts seeing Pei as his rival. We see Pei and Yang eating in a restaurant as Yang wonders why Pei isn't in the mood, reminding him that his games are profitable. He refuses to talk about it, but we learn that it's because his games have earned 6 million yuan, wondering how he can spend all of it in 3 months. Yang says he's going to pay the bills, and he calls the waitress as Pei realizes that Yang is richer than him. Yang is surprised to see the bill, thinking it's too expensive, so he asks Pei if he can get reimbursed for the meal, and Pei comes up with an idea. So he tells Yang to wait for him and he leaves the restaurant. Pei calls Richie, wondering if he can file the meal as a company team building exercise, and Richie tells him that he can because it doesn't go against the rules. So he becomes happy, wondering if he can also file a claim for his daily expenses, but Richie tells him it's prohibited. He returns to Yang, saying he's going to pay for the meal. And they watch the news as the reporter announces that a new integrated system has been invented. Yang realizes that the technology is advancing, thinking they should make a more complex game in the future, but Pei thinks they can't do it because they lack the knowledge. But this gives him an idea, saying they should hire more people, and he becomes excited, thinking it will cost him a fortune to pay for them. He admits that he doesn't know how to run a company, so they think it's time to hire an assistant. Moments later, Pei suggests going to a headhunting agency to recruit someone, and Yang hopes that their company can become the leader in the industry. We see a large company called the Fiery Sky Studio as its producer Joe checks the performance of the employees. He realizes that an employee named Lin is about to be laid off, but he calls his subordinate saying she should be allowed to stay in the company. At that moment, Lin enters the room telling him that she wants to resign, so he becomes sad, wondering why she's doing this. She explains that she wants to achieve her dreams and the company isn't the right place for her, but she thanks him for looking after her. After she leaves, he calls his client saying he just completed his task, and he assures his client that Lin will stop dreaming of making games. We see Pei and Yang in a headhunting agency as they meet a man named Lawrence saying they want to hire someone, but he thinks they aren't worth his time, telling them that his services are expensive. But Pei reveals that he's willing to pay his assistant 400,000 yuan a year, so Lawrence immediately decides to entertain them. He starts asking for the details, and Pei explains that he wants a female secretary who can help him with trivial matters because he wants someone pretty to brighten up his mood. Lawrence shows him the resume of a girl named Xin Ha Lu, saying she has an impressive background, but Yang wonders why she left her job. So Lawrence explains that she doesn't want to work under a man, but he thinks that she will agree to work with Pei because he's nothing like her past employers, and he immediately decides to hire her. As they're about to leave the building, they see Lin watching news about the Phantom General, but Pei tells her that the game is trash, so she becomes upset, saying it wasn't created for profit, as she mentions that it's a good game. He explains that the design is terrible, but she tells him that he knows nothing. Pei leaves the building, and Lawrence asks Lin if she's looking for a job, so she tells him that she wants to work for the company that created the Phantom General. He tells her that Pei is the owner of the company, so she immediately runs after him. But she isn't able to catch up to him, and she realizes she just missed her chance to land her dream job. We see Pei waiting in a cafe, and Lulu approaches him for her interview, so he tells her to take a seat. She reveals that Lawrence already told her about his company, saying she's impressed that he was able to achieve something as a startup. Thinking he's a capable young man, she thinks she's the best candidate for the job, and she starts bragging about her skill set, asking him if he has any questions. But he realizes that he's supposed to be the one giving the interview because she's going to be working for him. So he explains that he's satisfied with her qualifications, telling her that she should only give him advice when he asks for her help. She accepts his terms, saying she can start working immediately, but he tells her that he doesn't have an office yet, which surprises her. So they visit a tower where they are shown around and told that they can rent it out. Pei asks Lulu if it's the most expensive office building in the city, and she confirms this, so he tells the man that he wants to rent the entire floor, and the agent is excited about this, calling him a generous person. Lulu reveals that the area is about 3,000 square meters and the price for renting it is 360,000 yuan per month, but the man explains that he can have it for a cheaper price if he rents the entire floor, saying he won't find a better deal in the city. But he thinks it's too cheap, and the agent is surprised. But Pei tells him that life isn't easy, so he shouldn't lower his price to satisfy his customers. We learn that Pei is thinking about the Phantom General because it's still selling like hotcakes, so he wants to get rid of as much of his profits. The man is overjoyed to hear this, and Pei tells him to draft the contract as he thinks about how much he has spent for the first month, thinking his move is brilliant. Moments later, Lulu tells Pei that the rental procedure has been completed, so they need to purchase the office supplies. She shows him the list of items they need to buy, but he tells her that they need to promote a good working environment for the team, saying the items are too cheap. She asks him about their budget, so he tells her that he's willing to spend 2 million yuan, but Richie warns him that he's going against the rules, so he lowers it to 800,000 instead. Lulu thinks it's more than enough, and he tells her to buy the best office supplies she can find, saying they need to give their employees the best experience possible. But she asks him about his office, so he tells her to spare no cost, and she decides to rent a unit for him, giving him the key card to access it. He realizes that this is a great idea, because he won't be able to return to his dorm if he works overtime, and Richie thinks this is reasonable. so he starts relaxing in his unit. Lulu shows him the recruitment policy, but he thinks it's too strict, telling her to change it, because he wants to attract the most useless employees in the world. But she warns him that they could end up hiring people who can't make games, and he realizes that his plan is flawed, because he will be going against the rules if the employees can't produce a game. So he tells her that he's going to hire the game developers himself, but she advises him to change the way he looks, and he asks her if he can file a claim for his clothes, so she explains that he can, saying a proper suit is necessary for business meetings. So he decides to buy the most expensive suits he can find, and he realizes that he's doing great thinking he's going to lose all of his money at this rate. He decides to hire another person without talent, and he thinks about hiring the laziest person in his school. He goes to a computer shop where we see a boy named Bao who is a gaming addict, and we learn that he was expelled from his school because of his poor academic performance. Pei thinks it's reasonable to recruit a veteran gamer, so he approaches Bao, saying he wants to hire him as a game designer, and Bao looks at him, thinking he's a scammer, so Bao tells him to go away. But he gives Bao money, saying he can have it as a salary advance, and this makes him interested. Pei tells him that they have excellent computers in the company, saying he can play there during his free time. But Bao reveals that he doesn't know how to develop games, so Pei explains that he has faith in Bao's gaming experience, asking him if he wants to develop the greatest game in the world. Bao accepts his offer, so he tells Bao to report in 2 days, and he becomes overjoyed because he always wanted to be a game developer. The next day, Pei meets a man named Huang, who is practicing for the interview, so Pei approaches him, asking him if he's going to apply for the company. Pei pretends that he's also an applicant, asking Huang why he's late for the interview, so he reveals that he's currently employed, and he thought about applying during his lunch break because he isn't happy with his job. The elevator opens, and he meets his superior named Liu, who thinks he isn't going to make it because Pei's company has strict requirements. He enters the elevator with Pei, and they start talking about Liu, so Bao reveals that he's the lead game designer, thinking his background is impressive, so Bao thinks he isn't going to get the job. But as they reach the office, the employees greet Pei, causing Bao to become surprised, and he starts interviewing Bao, revealing that he is the CEO of the company. He tells Bao that he is the person they are looking for, asking him about his expected salary. So he explains that he isn't getting paid much, saying 2,000 yuan per month should be enough. But Pei reminds him that the cost of living is expensive, explaining that 2,000 yuan isn't enough to cover his expenses. So Pei offers to pay him double that amount, and he's overjoyed to hear this, saying he will sacrifice everything for the company. Later that day, Lulu approaches him, telling him that a girl wants to see him, and we see that it's Lin, as she asks him if his goal is to make money. But he denies this, so she thinks he's perfect, thinking he's doing this for passion, and he asks Lulu about her. So she reveals that she was a terrible employee at her last company, but this makes him decide to hire her. Back in the dorm, Pei's roommates wonder where he is because they haven't seen him for days. They ask Yang if he's going to return, and Yang tells them he's working, so he must have rented a place outside. We see Huang working in Pei's company, but he wonders why they aren't doing anything productive, because they're getting paid to play video games. Everyone starts questioning Pei's goals, so Lin explains that he wants them to keep playing so that they can identify the problems in video games. Huang realizes that Bao has reached the max level in the games they're playing, and he thinks this is what Pei wants them to do. But Lin thinks he wants them to feel guilty so that they will work harder when the next task arrives. Everyone wonders where Pei is because he never shows up in the office, and we see him sitting on his couch, realizing that it will be difficult to control his employees. He's worried that his next game isn't going to flop, but he sees an action movie and he comes up with an idea. The bell rings, and everyone's ordered to go home, but they wonder why they aren't doing anything for the company. At that moment, Pei appears, saying he's been absent because he's been thinking about the company's future. He informs everyone that they're going to be working on a first-person shooter, saying their goal is to become a leader in the gaming industry. Everyone starts doubting themselves, but he explains that he rejected the experts and picked them as the members in his team because he believes in their creativity. He tells them that they're the future of the gaming industry, saying Huang is a hidden gem because he performs his work diligently, and Bao is the master of games because his gaming skills are unrivaled. Pei thinks their team is invincible, saying they're going to make a great game, and he explains that he's going to give general directions in the early stages, saying he will leave everything to Bao and Huang. They head to the meeting room, where Pei gives Bao and Huang instructions, saying the game needs to have beginner-friendly controls, and the story needs to be incredibly long. He adds that the weapons must look cool so that the players will want to buy them, and he ends the meeting thinking his demands are going to ruin the game. But Huang thinks the players will complain if the controls are too simple, and the story won't be interesting if they don't keep it short. He adds that their company's reputation will be affected because they started a trend of zero in-game purchases, but they're going against it by listing guns for sale. Pei knows he has a point, but he tells Huang to believe in himself, saying he can overcome the problems. Pei appoints Huang as the lead designer and Bao as the game moderator, saying they need to come up with a draft in 1 week. After the meeting, Pei celebrates, thinking his game is going to fail, and he realizes that it's time to go home. So he leaves the office and he sees Bao playing a game, bidding him farewell. We learn that he's the only employee allowed to work overtime, but Huang thanks Bao for helping him hide, saying he wants to do his best for the company, so he decides to work overtime. They discuss the project as Bao mentions that Pei was able to achieve the best results with minimum resources, thinking they should follow his example. Bao thinks about spending money only on the important features of the game, and they enter Bao's imagination as he explains that he wants the game to start on the ocean, where the players are going to find an abandoned oil platform. Huang asks him about the enemies, and at that moment a mummy suddenly attacks them, so Bao saves him and the mummy falls off the platform. Countless mummies appear as Bao explains that their model design is simple because they're wrapped in bandages. Bao shoots one of them, causing it to burn away, but they realize that they're about to get surrounded, so they start running away as Bao explains that they don't need to simplify the controls because they can just make the mummies easier to destroy. But he runs out of bullets, so they decide to retreat, climbing up a ladder, and they reach a safe spot where they discuss the story mode. Bao thinks they need to add an important side character, and a girl appears, so Huang tries talking to her, but Bao reveals that she can't speak because creating a speaking character is expensive. He explains that she'll be giving quests through her movements, and she leads Huang to a corner where he encounters a mummy, so he runs away, and Bao knocks it down. But mummies swarm the area, so the girl gives Huang a rifle, and he uses it to defend himself. Bao arrives in a helicopter, and he helps them escape, saying the players will be invested in the story if they establish a bond with the characters. They return to reality as Huang mentions that Bao is a genius, but he thinks Pei is smarter than him, thinking he didn't say anything about the game because he wanted them to have fun creating it. Huang shares Bao's opinion and they think he's an amazing person, calling him a visionary. They wonder what he meant by cool weapons, and they think he wants them to add a legendary weapon into the game. They continue working all night, and the next day, Huang tells Bao that their game is going to be amazing, saying he will do his best to make it perfect. But at that moment, Yang arrives, greeting Bao, but he's surprised to see Huang, realizing that he broke the rules. That evening, Huang sneaks into the office and he starts working overtime, but Bao tells him there's no need to rush the project, so he doesn't need to do this every day, but he explains that Pei didn't give them enough time to test the game, so he needs to go beyond his schedule. He tells Bao that his proposal is almost done, and he shows it to Bao, asking for his opinion, but he starts speaking in gibberish and Huang has no idea what he's saying. He gives Huang his suggestions, but we see Yang watching them, and he thinks about reporting them to Pei. The next day, we see Pei and Yang in their classroom, and Pei receives a message from Huang who tells him that the game's design's framework is complete, but he can't believe his employees are working so fast, wondering why they aren't slacking off because he's giving them every reason to be lazy. Yang tells him that Huang has been working overtime in secret, and Pei thinks this is a problem. So he thinks about confronting Huang, but Yang tells him that Huang was just playing games during his overtime, so Pei changes his mind, realizing that Huang wasn't doing anything productive. He looks through Huang's proposal, telling him he's doing a great job, and then Pei tells Yang to ignore his behavior, saying he isn't doing anything wrong because game developers are required to do research by playing games. We return to the office as Huang tells everyone that the proposal has been approved, so they celebrate and they immediately start working on the project. We see Pei taking a bath as he realizes that he's still earning money with his past games, so he becomes frustrated, wondering how he's supposed to spend all of it. Yang visits him, telling him that all of his employees are going overtime to play games because Huang inspired them with his behavior. Yang thinks Pei shouldn't tolerate this, but he decides to spend money on them, telling Yang that they're sacrificing their health for the company, so they need to be paid for working overtime. Yang thinks he's an amazing person, but he explains that he's just giving them what they deserve, and he thinks they need to be treated better, so he comes up with an idea. The next day, Huang reports to Pei, giving him the project proposal, but he realizes it's going to take ages to go through it, so he tells Huang to take care of everything. But he tells Pei that he still needs to decide on the title of the game, and at that moment, he hears his employees ordering food. But he tells Huang to stop them. We see that Pei has prepared food for everyone, and Yang explains that Pei is going to provide them with free meals while they're working. Lulu reveals that the company's gym is still under renovation, but they have already hired professional trainers, so everyone feels excited. Huang approaches Lin, telling her he doesn't understand Pei because his kindness is unreal, but she believes he's doing this to boost their efficiency, and Huang thinks they should repay his kindness by working harder. They suddenly receive notifications, and they can't believe they have been paid for working overtime. Lin talks to P, who tells her that the rules have changed, saying everyone is now allowed to work overtime. He tells her that they will be compensated for going beyond their schedule, but she refuses to accept the payment, so he asks her why she's rejecting it. She says she doesn't want it, but he explains that she deserves to be paid for working overtime, telling her not to turn him down, and she becomes flustered, so she ends up accepting it. Everyone asks her if she turned him down, but she says she can't do it. And they start crying, thinking they're lucky to have an incredible boss. Bao thinks Pei didn't give them time to test the game because he believes in their capabilities, so they're determined not to let him down. Pei wonders how he's supposed to spend all of his money, and he shows Bao the materials they'll be buying for the project, asking for his opinion. We learn that they're going to spend 670,000 yuan for the game, and Bao thinks it's reasonable, saying it should be enough to cover everything they need. But Pei tells him they shouldn't cut costs, reminding him about his dream to create the perfect game, and he realizes that they need to spend more. Pei tells him to double the budget, and he suggests buying a server which costs over 500,000 yuan. Pei thinks it's a great idea, and he tells Bao to focus on the game development, saying they can buy the server after the game is released. Meanwhile, Li talks to Zhao, who asks him what they should do about Pei, seeing him as their common enemy. So Li tells Zhu to acquire Pei's employees, thinking his company won't be able to survive without them. Li's assistant tells him that Pei's employees are pathetic, but he's willing to do anything it takes to destroy Pei's company, so he decides to prox with his plan anyway. We see Bao watching a video about first-person shooter games, but Huang interrupts him, saying everyone is waiting for him to approve the documents. They start asking him questions about the project, and he tries to answer all of them, but he ends up getting overwhelmed, thinking he doesn't have what it takes to be a lead developer. But Huang decides to help him, ordering everyone to do their part, but they suddenly get interrupted as they receive phone calls. 1 month later, we see Pei in his classroom, but Yang is absent, so Pei wonders where he is. He suddenly receives a call from Yang, who tells him that the Fiery Sky Studio is poaching their employees, and he can't believe this is happening, so he rushes out of the class. Pei returns to the office, and he realizes that it's empty, thinking everyone abandoned his company, so he falls into despair, wondering how he's supposed to finish the game, but he sees Huang, and he realizes that they never left. Yang asks them what happened, so they reveal that the Fiery Sky Studio tried to hire them, but they decided to stay because they're happy in Pei's company, knowing they're being treated well. Yang tells them that the Fiery Sky Studio is the legend of the industry, but Lin thinks Pei is better, and everyone agrees with her. Huang reveals that they were testing the game in the AV room, and the office is a mess because they got too excited when they finished the project. Pei can't believe they have already completed the game, and they show it to him, revealing that it's called Project Oil Rig, and he can't believe his team was able to produce this, thinking it has great potential. Huang explains that they still need to polish the game, saying they have a month to fix everything, but Pei wants to stop them from working on the project, thinking it's a good idea to have a team-building activity, because they'll be wasting time and money. So he tells everyone about his plan, but Lulu interrupts him, and Li's assistant appears. Everyone recognizes him, and Huang warns Pei that he tried to poach them. But he greets Pei, saying he learned about Pei's greatness when he talked to the others. He says he wants to leave Li's company to join him, so Pei becomes confused because he thought Li's assistant was working with the Fiery Sky Studio. But he explains that Li is behind the mess, saying he's doing everything in his power to bring Pei down. He thinks Li might be able to help him fail, but he notices that everyone's upset, so he decides to reject Li's assistant. We see everyone training in the gym, and they start talking about the team-building activity, wondering where they're going. Lin mentions that she wants to visit the Fiery Sky studio because she wants them to meet Pei, thinking he's the real deal. But he overhears this, so he decides to grant her wish, saying they will visit her previous employer and their trip will have a budget of 405,000 yuan. But we learn that he's doing this to demoralize his team. Knowing his company is no match for the Fiery Sky studio, everyone has a meal together as Pei tells them about the plan, saying the company will pay for everything. But he realizes that they won't be staying at a luxury hotel, and he asks Lulu about this, so she explains that Lin told her that the budget is only 150,000. So he realizes that Lin misheard him, but he decides to stick with it, thinking Richie might stop him if he increases the budget. He tells Yang to ask questions in the Fiery Sky studio, saying he wants to know their past mistakes, and Yang agrees to do it. We see Joe in his office as his assistant approaches him, telling him that Pei's company has arrived to visit them. He doesn't want to meet Pei, thinking he's a fool, but his assistant disagrees, reminding Joe that he was able to create successful games, so Joe tells her to let him in. She allows Pei's group to enter, showing them around the company, and they're amazed by the facilities as Pei realizes that it would cost millions of yuan to build it. Pei meets Joe, and they greet each other, but Joe notes that Pei is wearing an expensive suit, realizing that he looks capable. So Joe starts seeing him as a threat, but all he can think about is wasting money, thinking he should invite Joe to eat at an expensive restaurant. Joe offers to show him around, because the company is so big that he might get lost, and Joe starts boasting about their facilities, telling Pei that he can learn from them. He offers to give Pei a limited edition doll, and he checks his collection, but Pei's team arrives and they start insulting the studio, thinking Pei's company is better. But they realize Joe is listening to them, and he sees Lin realizing she has decided to join Pei. He calls his employees and they have a meeting together as Yang asks Joe if he's giving his workers overtime pay because they're going beyond their schedule. But he denies this, and they are happy to hear this as Yang realizes that he isn't treating them well. His assistant introduces them to Pei's team, and she starts bragging about the games produced by their studio, saying Lin was a bad employee so she never deserved to be in their company. But Pei explains that she's now working as his director, and he orders her to tell everyone about their company. So she explains that Pei isn't like the other game developers, saying Lonely Desert Road went viral because it was able to do something other games weren't able to accomplish. She explains that it was able to change people's lives while they were playing, but Joe notes that she isn't making sense, and Pei totally agrees with him. She adds that the Phantom General is successful because of Pei's foresight, saying he challenged the industry's taboo by making the purchasable items extremely cheap. Joe admits that she has a point, and she calls Pei a genius before returning to her seat. Joe delivers his speech, saying all their games are classics, so there's no need to talk about them, and he shows everyone the new game they're developing called Bullet Mark. His assistant stops him, saying they shouldn't tell Pei's team about it, but he insists, thinking they're nothing compared to their studio. He tells everyone about the game, and Pei wants his team to listen so that they will get demoralized. We learn that Bullet Mark is a first-person shooter, and Joe reveals that they're going to make the weapons look as realistic as possible. He knows that the players want to grind to improve their skills, so he has decided to make the game free to play, but mentions that the drop rate is so low that the players will want to buy the items in the shop. Juan realizes that Bullet Mark is a brilliant project, thinking Project Oil Rig is nothing compared to it, so he falls into despair, and Joe knows that he has just demonstrated his company's superiority, so he starts looking down on Pei's team. But Juan wonders why Pei looks so confident, thinking he must have a plan. But we learn that he's actually rooting for Bullet Mark, hoping it's going to crush his game. Pei's team returns to the office where Lulu reveals that Pei is allowing them to go on vacation leave. Juan explains that he learned something during their team-building activity, saying Bullet Mark is going to be launching on the same date as their game. He knows that Project Oil Rig's quality is nothing compared to Bullet Mark, and they don't want Joe to succeed, knowing he isn't treating his employees well. Juan implores everyone not to go on vacation because he wants to improve the quality of their game, and they believe Pei arranged the team-building activity so that they will be aware of their competition. They love their company, and they want Pei to succeed, so they decide to do their best to surpass Bullet Mark. We see Joe calling Lee, who is angry because Joe told Pei's team about Bullet Mark, so he explains that he did it to crush their morale, thinking they aren't a threat, but Lee tells him not to underestimate Pei, because he's more dangerous than he looks, so Joe promises to deal with him. We return to the office where everyone works on improving the game. Bao gives suggestions on how to enhance the gameplay, but one of his co-workers tells him that Project Oil Rig is already better than most games. So Lin explains that they shouldn't follow the trend, because Pei is a trailblazer in the gaming industry. Lulu receives a call from Pei, who explains that he'll be busy for the entire week, and she promises to take care of everything while he's gone. Lin thinks he's busy promoting the game, and Huan reveals that they're done with the project, so they need to test it again. Bao decides to do it, and he has a pleasant experience, thinking the game is perfect. Meanwhile, Pei has just finished his exams, and Richie gives him a report, which mentions that the next closing date is 25 days away, and he still has 361,000 in his account. He knows he's doing well, and he thinks about wasting all the money so that he can make a fortune. So he calls Lulu, telling her to arrange another team-building activity, and he promises that everyone's going to have fun, saying they will spend 361,000 yuan for the event. We see the team in a private cinema, and they watch a movie together, but it suddenly cuts to a recording, and Pei realizes that the team has a surprise for him. They tell him that Project Oil Rig has been completed, and they're all looking forward to launching it right away. But Pei panics because he thinks it's going to do well if it's launched before Bullet Mark. So he tells everyone they shouldn't release the game yet, but Richie warns him that he isn't allowed to delay the launch for no reason. So he explains that they should celebrate before launching the game, and they decide to have a party as Pei asks Lulu about the vacation days he gave them. But Yang tells him that they decided to work instead, so they were able to finish the project ahead of schedule. We see that Bao is already drunk, and he sings a ridiculous song as everyone enjoys the party, hoping the game becomes a hit. Lin notes that everyone in the company is being valued, and she thinks Pei is an excellent leader, but she wonders why he looks worried, thinking he must be pondering about their future. But we learn that he's just thinking about how to lose all of his money, and Bao tells everyone that he was just a loser before Pei helped him discover his talent. So he thanks Pei for changing his life, and everyone starts crying, but they all end up getting drunk. The next day, they return to the office, but they realize that they haven't published the game yet, so they have no choice but to launch it immediately. Lin checks the download numbers, and she realizes that Project Oil Rig isn't performing well, because Bullet Mark launched on the same date, but they think it's going to improve after they market the game. But they realize that Pei didn't spend money on marketing, so they start to wonder if he even knows what he's doing. But Bao tells them not to doubt Pei, reminding them that his previous games did well, because he's a marketing genius. Lin believes he's trying to train their endurance by testing them if they can perform under pressure, and Huang thinks they need to do something. So they approach Lulu, telling her they need a budget to work on the patches for the game. Bao explains that they need players to test the game so that they can gather data to optimize the experience. But they don't have a large player base, so he suggests paying testers to give their feedback. But Lulu reveals that Pei didn't allocate a budget for this, so they decide to pay the testers themselves. Lin mentions that she knows a professional gamer known as King, and Bao recognizes him, saying he's a legend in the esports industry. She reveals that she sent him the link to their game, hoping he can help them promote it after he plays it. We see King as he's about to download Project Oil Rig, thinking it must be a terrible game, and he can't believe the legendary weapon costs 888 yuan, saying it's too expensive. But he decides to try the game anyway. He enters the game, wondering what he's supposed to do because he wasn't given an introduction. He looks around, thinking the graphics are bad, and he sees a girl who tells him she needs his help to escape. But a mummy suddenly attacks her, so he takes a weapon and uses it to shoot the mummy. He realizes that he needs to protect her to complete the stage, and he sees more monsters approaching, but she gives him an assault rifle, so he uses it to shoot them down as he notes that the controls are smooth. Thinking beginners won't struggle to learn the game, he follows the girl, who tells him she's too hungry to move, so he gives her a candy, and she starts entering the passcode to open a door. But a swarm of monies appear, and he tries to take them down, but he runs out of ammo, so he decides to retreat with the girl, but a mummy catches up to them, and it easily overpowers him. It starts eating him, but the girl takes it out, using her power to heal him. The mummy gets back up, but he's able to take it down, and we see King at P's company as Lin reveals that he begged her to bring him to their office. He reveals that he finished the story mode by climbing the tower to reach the helicopter, and he thinks the game's amazing, saying he loves everything about it. He thinks Bullet Mark is overrated because it lacks originality, thinking it's nothing compared to Project Oil Rig. They thank him for appreciating the game, and Lin offers to give him the legendary weapon called the Kirin, but he tells her he already bought it. He mentions that it looks cool, but he thinks the name sounds boring, saying they should call it the Mega Holy Gun, but they think it sounds ridiculous. He asks them why there's only one item for sale in a shop, so they tell him it was Pei's idea because he wanted to sell a legendary weapon in the game. But they thought about the lower class weapons, and Pei didn't mention anything about them, so the team decided to make the other weapons free. Lin offers to pay him for testing the game, but he refuses, saying he wants their game to succeed, so he's going to cover it in his livestream. We see Pei in his classroom as Yang tells him that Project Oil Rig isn't doing well, so he should return to their office after the exam. He thinks everyone is depressed because the game failed, thinking he needs to cheer them up when he returns, but he's actually happy knowing he's going to make a fortune. But Yang tells him that the game is gaining traction, saying it could go viral, so he becomes worried, thinking his game is going to become successful again. Pei returns to the office and he notes that everyone appears to be on the edge, thinking Yang must have lied to him, but they suddenly surround him, telling him that the game has gone viral and they congratulate him as they start celebrating their success. He returns to his office and he wonders why the game didn't fail, thinking his employees must have advertised it in secret. Juan gives him an analysis, explaining that it contains the factors that contributed to the game's success, so he reads it, realizing that King promoted the game because he loved everything about it, saying the controls are beginner-friendly and it even has a great story mode. But Pei thinks this doesn't make sense because he came up with those concepts, thinking the players are going to hate it, so he realizes that he's the reason why his game didn't fail. Pei's team thinks he's brilliant because he decided the game's direction from the beginning and his ideas made the game stand out. Pei walks past them and he appears to be depressed, but they think he's cool because he can stay calm and collected despite everything that's happening. We see Pei on terrace and we learn that he went through the comments of the players, realizing that they all loved his game. He reveals that he made 400,000 from the Kirin alone, and he knows that his game is still gaining traction, so he could end up making millions before the next closing date. He starts to feel depressed knowing he can't spend all of it, but Lim tell him to calm down, saying he can talk to her if he isn't feeling well, but he knows she will never understand what he's going through. She thinks he feels bad that their game crushed Bullet Mark, and he can't handle Project Oil Rig's success, so she tells him to take a break, saying his team will always be there to support him. Hearing this, he realizes that he can get other people to spend the money for him, thinking Richie is playing a game with him, and he knows his pride is on the line, so he's determined to come out on top. Pei realizes that Project Oil Rig is making more money than his other games, so he thinks about spending everything before the next closing date arrives. He notes that he has over 1 million yuan in his account, and he tries to think of a solution. Richie suddenly appears, and Pei mentions that he wants to update his games, so he needs to spend money for it. But Richie tells him that they have a rule which mentions that he needs to add microtransactions if he updates a game, so he changes his mind, and he considers giving half of the game's profit as a bonus to his employees, but Richie explains that it's against the rules because he's being too generous, so he thinks about implementing a claiming quota for them instead, and Richie allows it, asking him about the amount. But he mentions that he wants to give each of them 20,000 per month, and Richie denies his request because the amount is too high. That evening, everyone leaves the office, but Lulu realizes that Pei is still inside, and he tells her that he still isn't finished with his tasks. She offers to help him, saying she doesn't mind working overtime, so he asks her if she knows how to make excuses, because he wants to carry out his personal demands under the company's name. She thinks he's about to do something illegal, but he explains that he just wants to use the company's profit to give the employees benefits, so she decides to help him, and he explains that he wanted to share the company's profit with his employees. But someone set a limit for him. He asks for her advice, so she suggests sharing 50% of the profit as a project bonus, saying it sounds reasonable. He asks her if he can implement a special claiming system, so she tells him there's a solution, saying it's reasonable to give 3,500 yuan per month for each employee. But he explains that he wants to give them more, so she suggests giving each of them a 1,000 yuan shopping card, and he realizes she's brilliant, thinking she's the best member of his team. The next day, Lulu gives him a budget report and he goes through it, thinking he's finally able to outsmart the system. Richie examines it, saying it doesn't go against the rules, but he mentions that being thrifty is a virtue. Pei goes out with his team and he tells them that they can each claim up to 3,500 yuan. Saying he'll even give them gift cards so they can buy anything they want. They start shopping as Pei notes that he has 2 hours left before the closing time, so they need to spend money fast. He points them to the flagship store of the Shanwa company, and they decide to check it out, realizing that it's filled with interesting gadgets. Wang considers buying a laptop, but he mentions that the company's computer is better, so he thinks he doesn't need it. But Pei tells him that it offers him convenience because he can use it to work anywhere he wants. Pei approaches an employee named Ming who is checking out a gaming phone, but he thinks it's too expensive, saying his phone is still in good condition. So Pei reminds him that the company will pay for it, telling him he's going to need it when they develop mobile games. Bao looks at gaming equipment, and he mentions that he has already spent all of his money, so Pei tells him he's doing great. Pei approaches Lin, asking her what she wants to buy, but Yang runs past him, and Pei asks him why he's only taking phone cases. So he explains that he wants to keep changing his phone's appearance, thinking it will make him look cool, but Pei reprimands him, telling him to spend more money. He takes all the phone cases in the store and he gives it to Yang, telling him to buy all of it. As Lin observes them, thinking Pei is a great person because he's giving his employees special benefits. Moments later, Lulu tells Pei that everyone has achieved their spending target, and he thinks about all the money they spent, realizing it's not enough. So he asks her if he can use the company's money to buy what he wants, and she tells him he can buy items that can improve his work efficiency. He enters a store, saying he wants to buy a watch, but he realizes that he can't buy the most expensive one, and he asks Richie why he can't spend more than 40,000 for a watch. So Richie explains that his net worth is only 40,000, so he can't buy items above that price. Pei goes on a shopping spree. His employees still think he's thrifty because he only bought work-related items and none of them are overpriced. He realizes that he has a few seconds left before the closing time, but he still needs to spend money, and he sees a perfume. But Richie tells him he can't buy it, saying it isn't related to the company's business. But he explains that he's buying it for a client, and he realizes that Lin hasn't bought anything yet, so he decides to buy it for her, causing her to become flustered. Richie examines her, and he realizes that she has a net worth of 10 billion yuan because she's the heiress of the Shanwa group, so he allows it, and Pei is able to spend all of his money before the closing time. The system gives him a report, and he realizes that he lost 20,000 yuan, so he celebrates, knowing he has defeated the system. He tells everyone that he has an announcement tomorrow, and Lin thanks him for the gift, but he wonders why Richie allowed him to buy it for her. The next day, everyone gathers at the office, and Pei recognizes Huang and Bao as the best employees, so he gives them awards, but he announces that Huang no longer needs to work because he's going to be replaced by Ming, so everyone becomes confused. We learn that he wants to eliminate his most talented employees because he wants his games to fail, but he tells Huang that he's going to receive 1 million yuan so that he can start his own business, and he's overjoyed to hear this. Pei approaches Bao, and knowing he wants to do nothing but play, so Pei gives him unlimited paid holidays, but he explains that he wants to stay in the office, so Pei advises him to expand his horizon, and he reluctantly accepts the offer. Pei concludes the awarding ceremony, and he tells everyone that they're going to be working on another project. Wang is about to leave the office when Lulu approaches him, telling him that the money will be transferred to his account after he comes up with a business idea. He reveals that he always wanted to work in the gaming industry, and he thinks Pei is letting him go because he has a bigger plan for him. He sees Lin and Ming, telling them to update Project Oil Rig while he's gone, but Ming tells him that they won't be updating the previous games because Pei wants to focus on the next project. Wang can't believe this, knowing the company will make more profit if they update the games, and Ming thinks he still isn't ready to lead a new project. But Lin believes in Pei, thinking he has everything under control. Pei checks the system, realizing that he has 1 million yuan in his account, and the next closing date is 90 days away. He plans to take it easy, thinking 90 days is more than enough to create a bad game, but he thinks about controlling the pace because he doesn't want his employees to complete the game early, thinking they might update the previous games if they get the chance. He recalls that he needs to add microtransactions if the games are updated, and he doesn't want this to happen, knowing it's going to make the games profitable again. He thinks about how to ruin his next project, thinking he made a mistake by trusting his best employees, so he decides not to give Ming a chance to develop the game freely. Pei has a meeting with Ming and Lin as he thinks about handling the project himself so that he can make it as bad as possible. He explains that he wants to develop a game that will reflect the current situation of the gaming industry, saying it should help the players realize that they shouldn't spend their time playing games. He mentions that the players will only interact with a 2D character in the game, and it's going to focus on the storytelling, but he wants it to be as boring as possible, thinking nobody would be interested in a project called Game Producer. Ming wonders if they need to work on the 2D designs, but Pei is against this because they won't be spending money that way, so he wants the game to look unique. He shows them what the game is supposed to look like as he explains that the players will be playing as a game producer and they need to make choices as they develop games. Each decision will lead the players to a different ending, and the choices are complicated, so they need to think carefully because their decisions will affect the project's success. There's suddenly a blackout, so everyone wonders what's happening as Pei explains that sudden events can also be added into the game. Lin thinks the players could get bored because the NPCs aren't interacting with the main character, and Pei admits that she has a point, so he decides to give them the ability to communicate. He explains that they will add narrations to the game, and we see them gossiping about the main character. Ming finds the idea interesting, and Pei plans to humiliate the player with the narration. Thinking it will make the game controversial, Pei and Yang prepare for the winter break, and Yang asks Pei if he can stay in his unit. Pei grants his request, but asks him why he isn't going home for the vacation, so he explains that everyone's still working in the company, so he wants to do his part. But Pei tells him that he should enjoy his winter break because he's still a student. We cut to Ming, as he tries to record the voices for the game, but he's doing a terrible job, and the technician reveals that it's been 3 hours, but they still haven't made progress. Ming starts to lose hope, thinking he's useless, but Lin tells him that Pei believes in him. She shows him Pei's script, saying the game will be ruined if the player follows the narration, because it will lead them to choose an option that prioritizes profit. So she thinks it isn't meant to be taken seriously. Thinking Pei wants to expose the greedy people in the gaming industry, so Ming is determined to do his best to make the game successful, and they start making progress. But the technician interrupts them, asking them what will happen if the player doesn't follow the narration. So they tell him that it will lead the player to a bad ending, saying the gaming industry is cruel, but their company is successful because of Pei. After the recording, Lin and Ming walk home as Lin mentions that joining Pei's company has changed her life. Ming asks her about the Fiery Sky Studio, and she recalls that Joe ordered his employees to copy other games, thinking he's nothing compared to Pei. She wants the public to learn about the industry's bad practices, so she's looking forward to their game's release. After the holidays, Bao returns to Pei, who realizes that Bao is in terrible shape, so Pei wonders what happened to him because he thought Bao was enjoying his vacation. He begs Pei to let him work again, saying he feels empty because he can't pursue his passion. So Pei allows him to work for the company again, and as he touches the mouse, he immediately starts to feel better. Ming asks him to help with the new project, but he recalls that Pei ordered him to let Ming handle it, so he tells Ming that he won't interfere. That evening, Wang visits the office and he starts drinking with Bao. He explains that he can't think of a good business idea and he misses working for the company. He wonders if Pei has decided to update Project Oil Rig, and Bao denies this, but he mentions that he has discovered glitches while playing it and they decide to fix the game together. The next day, everyone hears rumors about game updates and they realize that the Phantom General has been optimized. So the players are excited, saying they want to support the game by paying for new items, and the team can't believe that thousands of people share this idea. Pei returns to the office and Lin tells him what's happening, but he tells her to ignore the players, saying the team won't update the Phantom General, but she tells him it's slowly being optimized, so he orders her to look for the people behind this. After some time, we see Guanjin entering the office and Lulu recognizes him, knowing he's an artist. He shows her a flash drive, telling her to give it to Yang because it contains the new characters for Phantom General. She wonders if Pei asked for it, but he tells her it's free and he's about to leave, but she thinks he's the one who optimized the game, so she stops him, telling him to give it to Pei. She leads him to Pei's office, but he explains that he isn't good with people and he's about to leave, but she opens the door, telling Pei that Guanjin is looking for him. He tells Guanjin that he doesn't plan to update the Phantom General, but Guanjin tells him that his company has made a name for itself, so the players have high expectations for him. He realizes that he needs to change his strategy because his company has a good reputation, so people will buy his games even if he doesn't advertise them. He thinks he needs to make everyone hate his company, and he tells Guanjin to forget about the Phantom General, because he needs Guanjin to help him with the next project. Moments later, Ming shows Pei the game they're working on, and Pei likes it, calling Ming a genius. He mentions that they will publish the game on April Fool's Day, and he gives Ming a marketing plan, telling him to give it to Lin, but he becomes confused because he thought Pei hated marketing. Lin goes through it and she wonders why Pei is spending a ridiculous amount just to hire Kiao, thinking the script is terrible. She recalls that Kiao covered the lonely desert road, and Ming finds this strange because Pei has never hired an influencer to cover his games without playing it. We see Kiao as he continues to create content, but we learn that his channel isn't doing well and he's running out of games to cover. He suddenly receives a message from Lin, who reveals that she has an offer for him, and he becomes excited, thinking about charging 1,500 for his services, but he thinks his price is too expensive. She gives him a call and she tells him that their company needs his help to promote the game they're working on, saying they're willing to pay him 10,000 yuan. He can't believe this is happening, asking her about the task, but she gives him a script, telling him to recommend the game to everyone. He doesn't seem to like the job because he's famous for roasting games, and he's about to decline, but she raises the price to 20,000, so he asks her if he can play the game first. But she tells him that they will only give him 10 seconds of footage from the game, and that's all he's going to be working with. He knows that his reputation will be ruined if he accepts the job, so he tells her to find someone else. But she explains that they're willing to pay him 50,000, and this absolutely blows his mind, so he decides to accept the job anyway. He checks the footage from the game, thinking it's trash, so he immediately regrets his decision, but he receives 50,000 yuan from Pei's company. He recognizes it as the company behind Lonely Desert Road, thinking Pei hired him to get revenge because he roasted the game in the past. He knows he's going to lose his integrity after he finishes the job, but he knows he needs money, so he decides to swallow his pride. Lin returns to the office, and she sees Huang and Bao working overtime, realizing they're optimizing the previous games, but Bao asks her not to tell Pei, and she promises not to say anything. She reveals that the new game will be published tomorrow, thinking it's going to perform well, but she's afraid that the players might find it boring. So Bao explains that it's natural for game developers to feel this way because they already know how the story is going to end. He thinks the players will enjoy the game, but he isn't sure if it's going to make profit because it's ahead of its time, so the game could end up flopping, but he admires Pei for taking such a huge risk. Gao releases an ad for the game producer and he praises it, saying it's an amazing game. He tells everyone to buy it, and the video ends with Pei calling the players idiots. The team doesn't like it, but Pei thinks it's brilliant, and Lulu reveals that the people aren't happy with the ad. They know that the company paid Kiao to create it, thinking they ruined his reputation, so they're planning to boycott the game. But Pei notes that everything is going according to his plan. Yang mentions that only few players downloaded the game producer because everyone hates their company, and Ming blames himself, thinking he has failed Pei. Wang appears with an editor named Hu Yu, and he explains that she will interview everyone, thinking this is their chance to save the company's reputation. But during her show, we see that she exaggerated the news, making it look like Pei is a terrible boss, and Lin sees this, so she becomes upset. We learn that Hu Yu's company is working with Li, and her boss ordered her to turn Pei into a public enemy. But later that day, Lin confronts Hu Yu, telling her to stop reporting fake news, and they start to argue. But Hu Yu's boss appears, and he reprimands her, telling her to stop making things up because he doesn't want to offend the Shanhua group. So Lin calms down, telling him to deal with it, and she walks away as he explains that Li is nothing compared to her because she's the heiress of the Shanhua group. We see Hu Yu interviewing Pei, and she asks him why he accepted the interview, so he tells her it's all because of Lin, since she was begging him to do it. But Hu Yu thinks they're in a relationship, thinking they make a great couple, and she begins the recording, but Pei tells her that he only has time for one more question. She asks him why he makes games, so he tells her the truth, saying he's trying to ruin his games to lose money. But he knows that nobody will believe him. We see Kiao thinking about the public's reaction, knowing everyone hates him because they think he's a coward, so he realizes he messed up because he ruined his reputation. He wants to see how bad the game producer is, so he decides to buy it, realizing it costs 28 yuan, and he starts the game, planning to tell everyone how bad it is. The narrator tells him about his goal to reach the top, but he must first start with a computer, and he thinks the story is great because he can relate with the main character. Gao chooses to develop an MMORPG, but an NPC tells him he's going to fail, and he recalls the moment he decided to start a channel, but everyone doubted him. He becomes addicted to the game, but he ends up getting the bad ending because he followed the instruction, and the NPCs call him an idiot, saying he shouldn't be too greedy. He decides to try again, and he tries to do things differently, but an NPC mocks him, telling him he has lost all of his money, so he still ends up failing. He realizes that he has a lot in common with the main character because people also doubted him as a content creator. But he never gave up, and his videos eventually gained traction. It looks like Kiao has finally achieved the good ending. But an NPC tells him that hard work won't guarantee his success, and he ends up failing for no reason. He thinks about how his channel isn't performing well, and he starts crying, thinking he was wrong about P because the game is a masterpiece. We return to Pei as he watches the news, realizing that Hu Yu described him as a legend, and she starts praising his company as she reveals that his employees are happy to have him as their boss. She mentions that he makes excellent games regardless of the cost, and Ming tells him that the game has gone viral because Chao covered it in his channel. Pei watches the video as Kiao mentions that he put up a performance with Pei's company on April Fool's Day, but the people didn't like it. He explains that everyone has been copying short videos to attract attention, and he mentions that he created the ad to expose what's wrong with shorts. He calls the game producer a masterpiece because it resonates with the player's soul and exposes what's wrong with the gaming industry. But he explains that the players hate it because of the ad, saying it was never meant to be taken seriously. Kiao encourages everyone to play the game, saying he was able to relate with the main character on a personal level because there are countless similarities between them. He explains that all artists feel loneliness because it's easy to be misunderstood when they voice their opinions, and he suddenly starts crying as he mentions that P never cared about the profit, and he created the game to wake everyone up. Pai becomes upset, realizing that Kiao ruined his plan, but the team celebrates. Knowing the game is successful, Pai falls into despair, thinking he's fighting against the world alone and he needs someone to help him fail. He suddenly receives a call from Lee, and he immediately realizes that Lee hates him, so he thinks he has finally found an ally. Lee accuses him of buying the media, and he believes Pai is taunting him, so he tells Pai that he won't go easy on him. Pai thinks Lee might be able to help him, but the system suddenly interrupts him as Richie appears, telling him that he has a special mission. But that's where this video ends.